Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good evening for attendees who joined us from the Middle East, and good afternoon for attendees who joined us from Europe. Welcome, dear colleagues and attendees, to the symposium webinar of today, titled Research Proposal and the IRB, the Whole Story. This symposium is under the patronage and care of the CEO of the Dammam Medical Complex, Dr. Zakaria Safran, who is himself an eminent scholar, research advocate, and postgraduate medical program founder. So we are really honored to be supported by his care, especially in this era of Saudi preparation for Vision 2030. Please welcome the CEO of the Dammam Medical Complex, Dr. Zakaria Safran, who inaugurate this symposium.
Assalamu alaikum. It is my pleasure to welcome you all for this conference, and this considered the second conference during the COVID crisis. The first one was management of COVID, was conducted by the Dammam Medical Complex, and this is the second for research. And it's obviously that our activity is directed toward the theme, which is right now COVID. So we started the management and now research. And in the Dammam Medical Complex, we recognize that there is a huge demand for improvement the infrastructure of research in our organization. So we invested in that direction, which has been taken over by the academic affair, Dr. Malik Mtairi and Dr. Tariq as the dean, to lead the research program in our organization. I would like to thank the speaker from inside the kingdom or outside for participating in conducting this conference, and also thank the participants. And I'm optimistic, and hopefully you will enjoy and having a fruitful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zakaria, for your speech and kind words. I wish now to give you all a little introduction about the symposium today. But first, I wish to thank Dr. Malik Al-Mutairi, Head of Training and Academic Affairs at the Dammam Medical Complex, for his support and leadership to organize this event. Also, I wish to thank the event troop team for preparing this event on short notice and for their professionalism. Today, we are really thrilled to receive and present two eminent scholars known for their caliber and knowledge. I myself learned a lot from them, and I hope all the attendees will profit from their lectures today. First, we will have Dr. Rawia Falata. She is an assistant professor at King Saud University, who will present a lecture titled How to Prepare a Successful Proposal for the IRB. Then, after 90 minutes, will join us Mr. Naeem Nuruddin, CEO and Managing Director, Sierra Limited UK, who will kindly speak about the Institutional Review Board, also called the IRB, within the 2030 vision. I wish to inform the audience that everyone can feel free to post his question using Twitter, #research_Saudi Vision 2030, and we will take them in order after the lecture to the presenter. And if there will be an excess of questions than the time frame permits, the presenter will kindly answer them later in Twitter. Regarding the audio icon, it is located down to your left of the screen, where you can easily unmute it. Okay, now we start with our first speaker, Dr. Rawia Falata. It is my honor to present Dr. Rawia Falata, who is an assistant professor at King Saud University. She is actually the head of the Nursing Administration and Education Department, King Saud University. Dr. Rawia had her bachelor degree from the University of Southern Queensland, Australia in 2008. Then she received her master's degree from Kent State University, Ohio, United States in 2013, while she obtained her PhD degree from the University of Massachusetts, United States in 2017. Besides teaching, she was the main author of many publications. She instructed many workshops related to research and had many peer-reviewed presentations. She also received many honors and awards on her achievements. I was lucky to attend one of her research workshops where I learned a lot from her. Please welcome Dr. Rawia Falata.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tariq, for this introduction. and hopefully I will be of help and provide information for our audience today. And I would like to welcome all of them and thank you again, and thanks to the Dammam Medical Center for giving me the opportunity to be with you today. I will share my screen now so that you can see my slides here. So today I would like to talk to you about how to prepare successful presentation. It is very interesting for me to talk about research because I have a great passion in research, and I have been one of the luckiest member of citizen of Saudi Arabia who have been blessed by the chance of going abroad and learn from a lot of experts in the area of research. And it is my honor to transfer some of this knowledge to you. So my objective here today is to define the research proposal. What is it? So we will all together know what is meant by research proposal. And then we will discuss the rationale for writing research proposal, identify the different part of research proposal, and also we will recognize the needed knowledge and skills to develop a successful research proposal. And when we talk about that, we mean the research knowledge, so that everybody who would like to write a research proposal, they need to have basic research knowledge in order to do that. And then we would like to talk a little bit about database search and statistical knowledge, and then I will touch base on ethical knowledge here, and then I will transfer to my colleague who will elaborate more on the ethical part of the research proposal. As well as I will mention a number of helpful resources, books, and maybe websites that could help as well in writing or developing research proposal. Okay, so first of all, when we say research proposal, what do we mean? Research proposal is a type of academic writing, but it is very concise and it needs to be coherent summary of a project, of a proposed idea for a research project with the intent to convince others, convince grant payer or IRB committee of the significance and worth of that research project. So all what we aim while writing our proposals is that to convince grant giver or people who provide fund for research, as well as IRB committees, that this research is significant and the project is worth the care and the attention. The purpose of research proposal is first to present and justify the need for the study, or as we like to call it, the why should we care? Why should we care about this idea? Why it is important? Why we should spend our money on this idea, or spend the time, or even make people participate in this study? What is it going to add to us? And then to present the empirical method to conduct the study, or as we like to call it, the roadmap for the research. My mentors used to tell me, Rawia, when you develop your research proposal, think in terms of, if I am not here today to carry on with this study, the person who will read the proposal should be able to conduct the study as you planned it. So it should be very clear, very detailed roadmap of what we are trying to do, to ensure the protection of the study participant or the ethical consideration part of the proposal. So from the writing, from the proposed research, the proposed idea for the project, it should be very clear that the scholar or the researcher is giving all the consideration to protect the participant of the study. So why do we write research proposals? So now we know what is research proposal. We need to know when to write it and or why we write research proposal. Many of us wrote research proposal as part of their studies, either undergraduate or graduate coursework as an assignment, or maybe as a graduate school application. There is numerous school or universities around the world that request or require with the application to be admitted to the school, they need research proposal so that the applicant will demonstrate that they have idea in mind, and it should be aligned with the advisor research program. So that's why we need to write research proposal. Also for graduate school thesis and dissertation, it is usually preceded by research proposal or summary of what is planned to be done and how it will be done. And oftentimes there is defense for this proposal. And then for grant and fund application, a lot of us scholars need to write very convincing research proposal to apply for fund, because it is really competitive to get a grant fund. So therefore it needs to be written in a very well-developed way to convince the funders to fund the study. And lastly, for the IRB application. So now, always in my courses, I like to define what I'm trying to explain and then give details about it, what is the purpose of it, and then try to distinguish it from everything else. So I like also to say what is research, what research proposal is not. So research proposal is not an abstract. Always people get mixed between a proposal and abstract. You ask for proposal from students in a coursework, and then what you get is something similar to an abstract. It's very brief description of what they are trying to do, what they have in their mind, and it is more similar like an abstract. And now in a minute we will talk about what is an abstract. But research proposal is not an abstract. It is much more detailed than an abstract. Also, it is not an opinion paper. So opinion paper is something that you propose, or you just is like an intellectual guess. So the writer is guessing what is supposed to be, but in a research proposal, it's something that must be supported by evidence. So although we write in a proposal, but everything we write in a proposal to a great extent need to be supported by evidence from literature. So it is not a thing that the author or the researcher come up with. It is your word, but it need also to be supported, as I mentioned, by evidence from the literature. It is not a quality improvement project, and also from my experience as a faculty member in the university, I find that a lot of the students get mixed between research project or research proposal and quality improvement project proposal. And those are two completely different things, entities, or piece of writing. And sometimes I try to solve it upfront or prospectively by giving the students a brief explanation about what is quality improvement project. So why research? In research proposal, we are proposing to develop new idea or generate new knowledge or add to the body of knowledge for the discipline. In quality improvement project, we are proposing to implement change in policy or in practice that is based on knowledge. So in research, we are developing or generating new idea. In quality improvement, we are building practice on that developed knowledge or knowledge from the literature. Okay. Also, something that is misunderstanding about research proposal is that it should be conducted only by expert people or academician or faculty members or PhD holders. All of that misunderstanding. Now, with the Vision 2030 and the support from the Ministry of Health, from the Ministry of Education, and every organization or everybody in the Saudi government, actually everybody can conduct research, especially the clinician. I always, in my courses in the Ministry of Health, try to encourage clinicians to participate in research and to apply for IRB and to conduct empirical research. Why? Because for us in academia, we read the literature and then try to find the gaps in the knowledge and fill this gap. However, when the idea comes from the clinician, it is from the reality. It is more touching the problem that they face every day, especially now with COVID-19 and what we are seeing in the practice. Academicians are somewhat away from this, not in a direct contact with the patient, although we are involved in it, but not like practitioner or healthcare provider who are in the front line. So we need this collaboration between clinician and academician in order to come up with more realistic ideas or problems to build our research on. Okay. Now let's talk about the different parts of research proposal. So as any other piece of academic writing, it has parts to be focused on or to give it a shape or organization, okay? This part that I'm talking about is mainly based on ABA style or American Psychological Association, but it might differ from a source to source or from based on what is the purpose of the proposal, or what is the guideline for the people who you are presenting this proposal to. So if you are writing this for grant, most granting body, for example, for us in nursing, Sigma Theta Tau, they have a structure for their or guidelines for how to develop your proposal. If you are applying for a grant for the Ministry of Health here in Saudi Arabia, they have a structure how you should write your proposal. Nonetheless, there is commonality between those different guidelines, which is title. All proposals should have title, and we will discuss more about what your title in a proposal should look like. Also, they should have abstract, all of them. And then they should have introduction and give or take, there is some part that should go into introduction and some other guidelines consider it as a standalone part on this proposal, okay? And then there is literature review, there is method, and then also timeline and budget, which is very obvious, but we can talk also about them. Okay, so the parts will be discussed here in the presentation in light of ABA style, as I mentioned. Okay, so first of all, the title. So title of the proposal should be the same title for the finished project to a great extent, unless something unusual came up. Because if it is well planned and well thought of proposal, oftentimes the results will be the same, everybody will stay the same. Then the title should be the same as when it is a manuscript or paper ready to be published. So therefore, the title should be very focused, concise, and descriptive. It should describe the research. Once I read the title, I know what method it was used, what is the variable, what is the population, and that's what I have on my slide. So it should include the dependent and independent variable. It should include the population, the method or the design, and also from the thing that we need to consider while writing the title, it shouldn't include any abbreviation, because once you put abbreviation on the title, you will leave your audience or readers wondering what you mean by this abbreviation, and then they need to read at least the abstract or the introduction of the paper in order to understand what you mean by this abbreviation, okay? As for the length of the title, in the literature, when you search, you can find that there are some titles that is short and attractive, and it looks like a movie title to a great extent sometimes. And sometimes you can find this titles that are just goes on and on and on and on. And by the time you read the last word, you already forgot what you have read in the beginning. So be careful that your title is not a paragraph. So ABA used to, in their older edition of the guide, the manual, they used to say it is around 20 words. And now they make it easy for everybody. If you follow the guideline for the font size and type, they recommend that it will be 1 to 2 lines maximum. So be careful that the title is 1 to 2 lines maximum, okay? Among the things that also not agreed upon to a great extent is the location. People are disagreeing whether to have the location or not to have it on the title, because sometimes it might decrease your readership, and that's our objective. If we published any research article, the aim is to have it read it more and then cite it more as well. If people are not reading and citing your work, it is not, it doesn't have any impact, in other words. So sometimes for me, when I'm looking to read about, let's say, staff satisfaction, and I found that the study has been done in some part or location in the world that is completely different than my context, I will not be interested in reading that paper enough. Although if I read the paper, there might be something interesting and applicable. So maybe using the location, the geographical location there wasn't a wise move. But for me, I always say to my students, and I always remind myself that if location has anything significant to add to this research, then use it. If it doesn't add any information, why using it and decrease your readership? Okay, an example for a title that may be very applicable nowadays, and we will see it a lot in the coming 2 and 3 months, is the association between healthcare organization management support and staff stress level during COVID-19 pandemic. So this is an example of a title for the proposal. Okay. The next part that should come in a successful proposal is an abstract, and also some sources or some guidelines, they say that a proposal is a summary, and abstract is a summary of a longer work. So why having a summary for a summary? And it is something that is very difficult to comprehend to some extent, but I think one of the older guidelines for ABA is that if your piece of writing is more than 10 pages, then you should have abstract. So I would go with abstract for all my proposal, just to account for those board members who are very busy. They don't have time to read the entire proposal. So I like to make my abstract very solid, very sound, and include abstract in any paper that is more than 10 pages. So abstract is a summary. It has the same part of the proposal that we are talking about right now, or we will talk about in a minute. The maximum of the abstract is 250 words, and sometimes, give or take, they will say 300 words. It begin in a new page separate than the title page that the author should write the title of the proposal and their name and credential on that paper, on that page. And then it should be one paragraph, only one paragraph. And it should end with keywords at the end of the abstract, and usually it is 4 to 5 keywords, so that it is easier for them when it is ready to publish to add it to a MASH term and to find it in the database. Okay, so this is the abstract. And the journals, especially healthcare journals nowadays, they are making the word space or the word limit for each manuscript and each article limited more and more. So 250 words, I think nowadays we are trying to learn how to write less, not to write more. Okay. Okay, and then the next part should be the introduction section of the proposal. Okay. Okay, so the introduction of a proposal serve also multiple purposes. It gives the readers background information or context of the research problem that we are dealing with. It should start with general statement of a problem or of a phenomena. Like, for example, nurses turnover is one of the most important challenges that healthcare delivery system around the globe face. So I start here with a general global term that this is a problem everybody internationally is dealing with. And then from there, I will start breaking this down and try to talk specifically about my location and about this problem, define it, what I mean by turnover when I say turnover, and things like this. And so we try in the introduction to start with a general statement and then narrow it down until we come to the area that to set the stage for our problem, for our proposal. So this is problem because nothing is done to fill this gap. So here comes my study to fill this gap. So that's how we set the stage for the proposed study. It should state the research problem, and also it should state the aim of the study as well. So with writing the introduction, I always refer to it as a storytelling. You have to have something interesting for your audience, something to grab their attention. Otherwise, your introduction should be the last, might be the last part that the reader will read, because if it is not coherent, not following a storyline, there is no passion, no excitement on that introduction. You might lose the reader who's reading this piece of paper. So as usual, start general and then try to narrow it down to the specific area that you are trying to search and justify the need for your study in that moment. And talk about the research problem, why it is important and why it is significant to be done. Okay. The next part is literature review. It is a comprehensive, question-driven synthesis of the literature. So it should be very comprehensive, and it should identify what is known and what is unknown. So therefore, it should be question-driven. And when I say question-driven, I mean that there must be a question. For example, I have done a literature review, and my question was, what is the definition of turnover in the literature? How people are defining turnover? So I went to the literature, different databases, and all what I was looking for is how they define turnover. So I found that there is variation in the definition. People were defining turnover as voluntarily leaving the organization. People were also defining it as people who moved from one department to another department. And also they were defining it as everybody who leaves the organization, retirement, maternity leave, whatever leave it is. So people were including that. And the reason for this question was that I was finding variation on the percentage of leave over or of turnover among nurses around the world. So in the literature, you can find turnover rates between 47% to 16%. And this is a huge variation. So I was interested in knowing why there is this huge variation in the rate of turnover, and that was the answer right there. And it was published on Journal of Nursing Management, the paper. So I like also to think about literature review as thematic analysis, if you are familiar with that term. And this is a very qualitative term. So people who are participating in qualitative study or who are familiar and conducting qualitative research, they know what I'm referring to. So thematic analysis is finding the similarities and in another term, comparing and contrasting the literature. So what I like to do is that look at all the work that have been done in this area, and then trying to analyze it and to find theme on that literature. And I will elaborate more on this and give you example how I do it all the time. Okay, also from the things that is very useful in literature review is the 5 C's of literature review, which is cite, compare, contrast, critique, and connect. Okay, and most of us who conduct literature review, we are missing some of those C's. We are not doing that right. So to cite, that means to go to the database, to search for the literature, to find it, and to be comprehensive, to cite everything, to find everything. Compare and contrast is like finding similarities and finding differences in the literature, and then critiquing that literature. Nothing wrong with critiquing literature. People oftentimes feel like, I don't want to start critique other people's work. I don't know what's going to happen to me. Maybe they will critique me as well. And when we say critique, we don't mean only find the negative things about what they have done. Critiquing means find the positive and the negatives as well. For example, if I'm looking at literature that or work that has been done on, let's say now in COVID-19. Some of the studies we found that we will find that they have a small size because of the condition right now. They don't have enough participants, people are busy, nurses are, healthcare providers are busy, they don't have time. So you will find a small sample size, and then they will say that there is no significant association. We can critique that. We can say, well, they don't have enough power to totally say that there is no significant association or there was no significant result. Why? Because they might be underpowered. So this study needs to be redone with a bigger sample size. So that's how we critique. We don't say bad things about the study, but we have to have a methodological reasons why we think that another study is needed in this area. The connect part is where you can connect the literature to what you are trying to do or the work you have done. So I will find everything that has been done in the commitment phenomena, how people can be committed to their workplace, and then I will find a gap and connect all what have been done to this gap. I say, okay, so this and this has been done, but this area there is no research in this, so that's why my study will come here to fill this gap. So this is how we connect what have been done to what is proposed or what we are doing right now. So common mistake also, students and people, I review in a number of journals and always find these mistakes common, and it is also in the publication and academic writing book. From the common mistake that are done in literature review is summarizing the briefest literature. And students are notorious, and everybody, I think even me, I'm guilty of doing this sometimes. Why? Because it is very comfortable to find 25 studies and then summarize all of them and start just putting small summaries about what you have done. This is not synthesis of the literature. This is, as I said, it's just summary. So synthesis of the literature is like when we do jigsaw puzzles, take it apart and then put it together in a different way to have different picture. So, and I'll show you example of how this could be done. Okay. Also, lack of organization or structure to what we are doing is something common in literature review. So while you read the literature review, you find that it is small or it is group of small paragraphs of summaries of research. So they don't have a structure. There is no theme, no organization to this literature review. Okay, and also there is superficial or inadequate evidence. We come to a very researchful area or phenomena, and then you find that the author only cited like 10 research study or 10 studies on that on their proposal. So that's an inadequate. How we know for sure that what you are proposing is not already there? Why replicating and duplicating and wasting time? So there must be extensive literature review to ensure that this work wasn't already done by somebody else. Remember, when you think about an idea, I don't know what the exact number, but there is many people who thought of it in the same moment like you, as you think about it. So there must be an in-depth review of the literature in order to come and say that there is a gap and my study is needed. Okay, also I talked about the lack of critique and then irrelevant literature. And this is very, very common with international students who do their work abroad. I was one of them, so that's why I can say it, I can tell. When I submitted my first proposal draft, 50% of it was deleted by my advisor. And I was very upset. I said, I spent time, nights and nights writing this. And she said, well, Rawia, this is all irrelevant. It doesn't have anything to do with your problem. And I learned the lesson. If it doesn't have anything to do with your problem, with the main problem, don't add it to the literature review. And this was a valuable lesson for me, because now when I want to write for any journal, I know how to write in a very concise way. And why I say this is very, very common, very known with international students in general, not only Saudi or Arab student, this is international student in general, because we have the feeling that the other person who is reading for us, they don't know about our culture, our background, our context. So we keep talking about the culture, the religion, the economics, the everything we can think about. And this is all not relevant to the main issue. Also, oftentimes from the common mistake that we could commit while trying to do our literature review is using secondary resources. And when we say secondary resources, people are sometimes surprised that books are secondary resources and they shouldn't use it in literature review, as well as reviews and meta-analysis, meta-synthesis. Those are all secondary resources. So the focus should be in primary resources, and those are reports of current studies. Okay, this is an important resource, and I am hoping that everybody will find it useful. This is Health Science Literature Review Made Easy, which is the Matrix Method by Gerard. I think this book was the thing that get me through PhD education or PhD school degree. Gerard talked about how the matrix can help you in organizing and in making sense of what you are reading in the literature, because we are talking here in some areas about maybe around 40 studies, 20 studies, anywhere between 25 and maybe 40 sometimes. So in order to make sense of all of this literature, you need to organize it in a very systematic way. And Gerard does a great job in talking about a method. And now I'm going to show you, I think in a minute, I will show you an example of the matrix that I use in my literature review. Also, helpful way to develop your literature review as well as skills is reading well-written papers, because you are trying to achieve what those people achieve in their paper. So reading is the way to improve your writing, improve the way you write. So if you read a well-developed paper with well-written literature review part, it will help you in improving your literature review skills. Okay. Now we talk about the method, and I think we will revisit literature review again because it is a very important part of the proposal. Method must be well written and reflect the researcher methodological knowledge. Therefore, you have to have well or grounded knowledge in research method. So you need to know about different design, different sampling techniques, and so on. And we will also talk about it. Also, it needs to be very comprehensive and detailed. A study could be carried out or carried by any other scholars if you are not to continue in this study. Link the design and methodological selection to the proposed outcome. So a lot of papers, proposal, or even finished research, the design or the aim will be to investigate a social process, for example, and then the design is phenomenology. Phenomenology never explain social process, so that's mismatching between the design and the proposed outcome. Another example is that the researcher will say that we will compare mean, or we will compare what is it like for female and for male, how different they are. And then the design is just survey, cross-sectional survey design. So we know to compare mean, we need something experimental with two groups or something like that. So, I mean, the design of the study need to match the proposed outcome, okay? And as usually said, it is the question of your research that drive everything. So once you have a question, the question will drive the method and the sampling technique as well. Okay. The part of the method section should be the design. And we will talk about the design as well. It must contain aim, objective, or purpose. It is synonyms, and you can use any of them. Goal as well is one of the terms that could be used in this area. Also population. It should be defined very clearly in the method section. And the sample size as well through power analysis, using G-power or using the different formula in the literature. Sampling technique as well should be very clearly defined. And then the instrument that is used, data collection procedure, and data analysis as well. Ethical consideration is also maybe the final part in most proposals. Some people write research section as well, but oftentimes people stop at the ethical consideration. I will not elaborate a lot on this part, as I know that my colleague Mr. Naim here will cover it. But it is not merely, I would like to say that the ethical consideration section is not merely about obtaining IRB approval, because many times in manuscript or in proposal, we will find that people saying that IRB approval was obtained. So that's not all the ethical consideration that you need to take care of. It is a moral obligation. Ethical consideration is moral obligation. I don't want here to go to philosophy and talk about ethics as part of philosophy or as a branch of philosophy. However, it is a moral obligation that you as a researcher should be obligated to minimize the risk to the participant of your study. You should respect and reserve their dignity as human beings, even if you are dealing with children, you are dealing with people with disabilities. All of those should be considered, and their dignity should be reserved. Obtaining full informed consent or assent, and this should be explained very clearly in the ethical consideration part of your proposal, as to who will obtain this informed consent, and when, before the procedure, or at what time exactly, and also was the voluntarily nature of the participation explained in while taking the informed consent. Okay, and also maintaining the subject privacy and anonymity. Subjects should be reassured, and it should be actual that nobody know that they participated in this study, especially if it is something that could result in harm for them, losing job or other social consequences. Avoiding deception or exaggeration. Some people will say that, well, if you participated in this study, this and this will be the benefit. And it is not true, it's just all exaggeration. So you need to be truthful to the participant. Give the participant the right to withdraw with no consequences, especially with the healthcare profession. Sometimes patients are very vulnerable, so they are afraid that if they refuse to participate in the study, then some consequences will happen to them. So we need to reassure them and give them the freedom or the autonomy to select to be part of the study or not. Participants should be voluntarily or participation. Data storage should be according to the guideline. Most universities, most IRB committees, they require the data to be kept in password safe or password protected hard drive or laptop or desktop. Data sharing should also be explained, that data, raw data will not be shared, only aggregated data will be shared in conferences on academic journal as well. Okay, so that's for the IRB the proposal sections, the most common that you find in any research proposal. And now I will talk about some of the skill and knowledge to write successful proposal. It is a challenge for me to cover everything in 90 minutes, but I will try to give you overview, and then the most important thing, resources to go back to if you would like to find more information. I like the book. I will show you the cover of the book, Bullet and Beck research book, nursing research book. It is a very nice book, and I think it is not only for nurses. Anybody in the healthcare system, any professional can read it and use it in developing their proposal. And actually what is in front of you here in the screen is Bullet and Beck breakdown for the research process into 5 different phases. And I adore this flow chart because it really explains everything about the research process. And the research proposal is mainly the first and second phase of the research process. And the first phase, they call it the conceptual phase, where the formulation and delimitation of the problem is happening, reviewing the related literature, and undertaking clinical field work, is that was a necessary step, defining the framework or developing conceptual framework as well, formulating hypotheses in the first phase, which is the conceptual phase, where everything happening is thinking about this project, in fact. The second phase, which is the design and planning phase, where the researcher select a research design, develop intervention protocol, identifying the population, designing the sample plan, and then specifying method to measure research variable, developing method to safeguard subjects, or which is the ethical or moral approval, and then finalizing the research plan. The other phases, or the empirical phase, this is beyond research proposal. So maybe in another course, we can talk about the empirical phase and the analytical phase, and then dissemination phase, which is the actual study or the empirical phase of it. Okay, so research knowledge, the proposal is done through the first two research phases, as I mentioned, the conceptual phase and the designing and planning phase. The first step in the conceptual phase is research problem. So what is research problem and how we can formulate it? Research problem is an enigmatic or troubling condition. It could be solved completely or partially by research study or by research project. And this is to distinguish between research problem and policy problem or quality problem, which has a different pathway to solve it. So research problem, it could be solved by a research study, okay? Sources of research problem could include, as I mentioned, clinical experience, and clinicians come up with the most wonderful research ideas because, as I said, it is very realistic. And then also it could come from reading in the literature. Also from theories, which is part of the literature. Also, it could be suggested by local, regional, or global issues, as in our situation when the Vision 2030 came, all the research was geared toward the objective and the fulfillment of those 2030 strategic objectives. Also, another example, when the reform in America happened in the United States for the healthcare, or Obamacare, everybody was gearing the research or the idea about the effectiveness, the different programs or the different rules of Obamacare. Okay, or it could be just a mere interest in the topic. People are just interested in, or the researcher is interested in that topic. Or it could be part of the program of research as the next step for the researcher. I did this and this and this, and now this is the next step. So that might be the sources of research problem. Research problem always appear in proposals or in research report as problem statement. It is articulates the problem and an argument that explain the need for the study or it is significant. An example is that there is a wealth of evidence in the healthcare literature that support the association between smoking and lung cancer. Nonetheless, it is documented that significant % of healthcare providers are smoker. New intervention to change the perception about smoking are needed. So here, the researcher set the state, this is known. However, although we know this information in the literature, still this practice is happening. So we need to find something else to try to solve this issue. Okay, again, we are visiting now the literature review for second time. How to locate relevant literature, okay? So locating relevant literature is done through database search by using keywords. Usually they are the study variable or sometimes the population. It might be the location, depend on what exactly we are looking for. The most common database for healthcare are CINAHL for us in nursing, which is the cumulative index of allied health literature. And then there is Medline, PubMed, also Google Scholar. Now it is something that there is support in the academia of the use of Google Scholar. In fact, for me, it is the first step to visit Google Scholar, and then from there, I go back to those databases, okay? For us here in Saudi Arabia, we have the Saudi Digital Library, which would give all of us in Saudi Arabia access to those databases. I know that for sure for us in King Saud University, we have access. For the Ministry of Health, it is confirmed that you have access to the Saudi Digital Library. So I think most people who are participating in research have access to the Saudi Digital Library. Again, the focus must be on primary resources, which is original report of the study, not secondary sources like reviews or books. Okay, database search as well. There is search strategy. Sometimes I give my student assignment for the master student to write a research proposal. They come back to me like, we search for these keywords and nothing came up. So there is no literature in that area, and they are trying to change the problem or the research idea they have, although it is very interesting. The thing that I do usually is that I ask them, have you tried this key term? Have you tried this synonym? Have you tried to change it a little bit? So once they start to look up different keywords, they find that there is some work has been done on that area. So it is very important for any of us who is trying to participate in research to know how to conduct search on databases. And there is a lot of, I think, courses on the Saudi Digital Library on how to search and how to use key terms and mesh terms and how to use the abbreviation to find the key term or to find the literature that you are looking for, okay? Also, Gerard, in the book that I have just showed you in before 2 minutes, talks about how to follow your search by using flow diagram, and this could be found a lot in the literature nowadays. So the flow chart will describe exactly the steps that you have taken to reach to the sample of literature or sample of article that you have discussed in your literature review. Let's say, for example, I start with the keyword turnovers and satisfaction and Saudi Arabia, and the first hit was like 300 article. And then I tried to narrow it down by language. I should document all my limiting steps that I have taken, or every time I use any limiting criteria to narrow down my literature, I should document this, and then I should develop a flow diagram to show how I conducted. And every person who would like to check or examine how I reach to this literature, they can use or follow the same steps to reach to the same number of articles. So that's something useful, and it is appearing more and more in the published work. Software also to organize the retrieved article. For me, I use Mendeley, which is a very useful library. I can access it from anywhere. It helped me while I'm writing to include my in-text citation, and then it generates automatically the bibliography or reference list at the end of writing. People are using different stuff to do that, like RefWork, EndNote, a lot of them. So for me, I use Mendeley because it is very convenient and I can access it anywhere. Gerard also talked about abstraction sheet, and this is what in front of you is an example of a study that I'm working on right now, where I'm trying to review the literature on the job security. And I think up to now I have 26 articles on my sheet, and I think I have 15 more to review. And then at that point, maybe I will feel ready to start writing. So there is multiple steps that we have to do before we start writing a proposal or manuscript. So that's an example of abstraction sheet. Gerard talked about the heading, which is here, if you can see where I'm pointing. For me, I have author names, year of publication, which journal they published in, because if they were successful in publishing in this journal with the same variable, maybe I will be also successful as well. So it will give me idea where to target in publishing my work. Also the variable, objective, design, and then the scales that they use. If I'm in the proposal stage, maybe I'm looking for scales to measure my variable. So this will give me an idea which scales people have been used to measure those variables, and then the result, and if I have any comments. And the next step for me is to start analyzing those in a thematic way. So you will find that if this study is talking about the factors that are associated with job security, I will highlight it or color the text with green, for example. And then if it is talking about the outcome of job security, I will highlight it with red. And while I am writing, I can see the theme. It is colorful, it is there in front of me, and it will lead me while I am writing, so I can synthesize the literature in a very smooth way. Okay. A statement of purpose is it is established the general direction of the inquiry or the research. Easy to identify because most of the time it will be that the purpose of the study. This is the purpose of the study. Sometimes they call it aim, goal, or objective, and these all are synonyms. A good statement should contain the BICO elements, and this is very familiar in clinical or evidence-based practice, the BICO elements, which is the population or problem for the B, and then the I is the intervention, the C is comparison, and then the O is the outcome. Sometimes the C is in and out, sometimes it is comparison is there, or sometimes it is not there. So those are the components that will be in the statement of purpose. An example of that is the purpose of this study is to examine the impact of computerized triage system comparing to the traditional manual system on the ER patient's wait time. Okay, among the items that should appear also, or should we should have knowledge about as researcher, is how to formulate research question. It must, in most cases, it is a direct rewarding of the statement of purpose. Also, it contains the BICO element. So now the statement that I just give you as an example could become a question if we said that for ER patient, will the use of computerized triage compared to traditional manual triage impact waiting time? So this is the research question. Hypothesis is a prediction or the thought of answer for the research question. Usually hypotheses are tested statistically. They can be proven or rejected. It could be directional or non-directional hypothesis. And there is also research hypothesis and null hypothesis. Example of the hypothesis is the use of computerized triage system will reduce ER patient wait time more than manual triage test system. So this is a hypothesis or a direct answer to the question that we have just asked. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about the research design, which is a very important piece of knowledge for anybody who would like to write successful research proposal. So the research design is your everything, as we said, in your research proposal is driven by the question, the research question, what you are trying to answer. Quantitative research could be experimental design or randomized controlled trial, and it could be either post-test only or pre-test post-test design. Okay, post-test only is something that is not recommended unless it is cannot be it is not avoidable. However, if you can avoid it and do pre-test and post-test design, that is the gold standard for quantitative research. Okay, why? Because when you do post-test only, it is not 100% sure that the impact that you are seeing or the change in the dependent variable is because of the independent variable or the manipulation of that variable. However, if you have pre-test, post-test, you have baseline data to compare so that you will know that whatever manipulation or treatment you have done has impacted the dependent variable. So therefore, pre-test and post-test design is more preferable and stronger than post-test only. Okay, intervention, the researcher does something to the participant, to some of the participant by manipulating the independent variable. Control group that does not receive the intervention, randomization. the researcher assign participant to a control or experimental group on a random basis. So these are the conditions of the experimental design. Okay, it should have intervention, it should have control group, and there must be randomization or random assignment to the different group. Okay. Also, in the quantitative research design, there is the quasi-experiment, which is non-equivalent or within subject design. Also, it has intervention, control, exactly like the experimental design. However, it lacks randomization. Why? Because sometimes it is unethical to randomize. For example, if I'm to study the attachment between the mother and a newborn child for the normal or term baby and the premature baby. It is not ethical to randomize and to put ladies through premature labor and then to have premature babies and then let other female to continue to term and then have full-term baby, to compare the attachment between the mother and the newborn. This is unethical. Therefore, we cannot randomize. We have to have convenient sample of whatever is there happened by nature, that some people have preterm labor and some people, and then examine how they build this relationship between the mother and newborn. So sometimes it is unethical. Also, smoking related study, I cannot, or drinking sometime, I cannot bring people and force them to do some drug abuse or smoking just to examine how is it going to impact their health. So therefore, there is a quasi-experiment when it is unethical or not possible for me to randomize as a researcher. Also, there is a non-experimental design or correlational or descriptive study. There is no intervention, no control, and usually no randomization. So all what I have to do as researcher is to observe and describe the phenomena as it happened in nature. Okay, qualitative research design. It is not common in a lot of the, let's say, applied health science. Maybe qualitative is more common in psychology, in nursing to some extent. However, it is a very interesting research design or method of investigation. There is mainly 4 main methods of qualitative research, which is phenomenology, which is oftentimes appear as the lived experience of the participant. What is the lived experience of healthcare provider who are providing healthcare nowadays during the COVID-19 pandemic, for example? So this is the phenomenology, investigating the lived experience of a group or population. And then there is case study, which is looking at the social process. And when we say case study, people get confused with usually the one single case report, which is completely something different. So case study here is a design which can have multiple subjects on this study as well. And sometimes the unit of analysis oftentimes need to be identified, what we are trying to learn. So the subject here in case study could be individual, could be organization, could be community. And sometimes for one of my students, the unit of analysis was the decision. She was interested in investigating the decision. So it was her unit of analysis. And it is a very interesting and underutilized research design. And then there is the grounded theory, which is always toward theory development. People who are interested, theorists who are interested in doing theory development, they will use this kind of design. And then there is ethnography, which is about the lived or practice of communities, how they live their life. And then the other or third branch of research method is the mixed method, or the use of quantitative and qualitative together, or the objective and subjective data. Also underutilized, but sometimes it is not avoidable if you want to understand the objective and subjective aspect of a phenomena. And I think that the most reference that is used for mixed method is Crossword, according to him, even in mixed method, there must be one dominant design. So for example, your dominant design could be qualitative and then quantitative to support that information. In any case, both of your method, the quantitative and qualitative, both design need to be explained very clearly and defined very clearly. All the tool that will be used and all the sampling technique and so on should be explained very clearly. So it should be treated as two separate studies. A little bit about sampling plan. There is two main method of sampling, which is probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Probability is usually based on the random sampling and is associated with the experimental design. So there is simple random sampling, and then stratified random sampling and systematic sampling. And those all randomized way of selecting sample, and this is always associated with the experimental design. And then there is non-probability, which is convenient sample, quota sampling, and purposive sampling, which is usually used in qualitative research, okay? And sample size, as we said, is determined using G-power or power analysis. Also, a concept that should be understood very clearly by all researchers, which is operational definition and measurement reliability and validity. For any concepts that of interest or variable that we are trying to use in a study, there must be theoretical definition and operational definition. Theoretical definition is basically how we define it in the dictionary. What is the meaning of word? And then operational definition of a construct or of the concept, how it will be measured. For example, job satisfaction in this study will be measured using so and so, using this scale, the name of the scale or the name of the author. For example, depression, using Beck depression inventory or scale. So given a title or a specific scale that will be used to measure this construct is the operational definition. Each scale or instrument has reliability and validity. Reliability is the stability of the scale over repeated measure. How stable is my scale when I use it over and over again, okay? Which is usually measured in research by internal consistency reliability. The range of this test is between 0.0 to 1.0, and with 0.8 preferable. And then the validity of the scale is in a measure is the context in the degree to the measure is serving its purpose or measuring what is supposed to be measured, okay? So when I have like a scale measuring satisfaction, it shouldn't measure commitment, or it shouldn't measure something else, security, for example. So this is validity. The instrument is measuring what it was intended, developed to measure in the beginning, okay? Finally, I know it is very difficult to give a lot of statistic information here, but again, I will provide resources, so whoever is interested can go and have more information about anything that we have touched base here on this very short course. But for statistics, it is very important to know that there is level of statistical analysis, which are 3 levels: univariate analysis, which is descriptive analysis, and then there is bivariate analysis, which include correlation and simple regression. And then there is multivariate analysis, which is multiple regression and Markova, example for it. The selection of tests depend. I have a lot of colleagues, and even myself, sometimes I'm wondering what statistical analysis should I use for this study, for this particular hypothesis, for this question, okay? So what determine what statistical analysis or what statistical test to use is the research question, hypothesis that I'm trying to answer, the level of measurement of my variable, and then the sample size, okay? So if my question is to compare me, and I have, for example, One of my variable is measured at the nominal scale and at the nominal level, and the other one at the scale or interval level. Then I can conduct a t-test, for example, and if I have adequate sample size to do that. So those are the three main things that determine which statistical analysis to use. Also, I have found that there is a numerous flow chart like this one, asking you question to help you in the decision making of what statistical test you can use. For example, here they ask about the data type. Is it continuous? Is it discrete or categorical? If it is discrete or categorical, then immediately you can use some of the non-parametric analysis like chi-square, for example. If it is a continuous, you should look at the type of question. If you are looking at relationship question or difference question or mean difference question, then it takes you another pathway here for the correlation family and regression family, and here to the t-test family and ANOVA and Markova family. Okay, so this is some useful tool that could use as well. For ethical knowledge, there is a number of courses that you can use. NIH, they provide very great course that give a lot of historical background about the ethics, and then you can obtain a certificate as well, and it was required by IRB committees. And here in Saudi Arabia, we have the National Bioethical Committee as well, where you can have the course, training course, and then the certificate of the ethical course. There is also ethical consideration chapter in, as far as I know, all the research books, and there is articles about ethical knowledge as well. These are some valuable resources that you might find useful as well. This is the book for Bullitt and Beck, Essential of Nursing Research, and this is the statistical method for healthcare research book as well. It is very useful. And those are some resources for academic writing. If you want to know how to cite and how to use evidence in your writing, what is the right grammar to write in your proposal, those are some useful books that you can use as well. Those are some of my resources, and I think this is a good segue to my colleague's presentation about the ethical consideration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Arawiya, for this informative and detailed presentation, which I think all of us enjoyed it very much. Now we will take some questions within the time frame that we have. The first question, it's regarding how to calculate the sample size in randomized control trial. I think he went to know regarding the power analysis. Dr. Arawiya? Hello?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you now, yes.
I'm trying to open my power analysis here just to show you.
Okay.
If I can share my screen here with you. Okay, so if you can see my screen right now, this is I'm in the G-Power program, and there is also when you download this program, there is description on how you can use it and how you can utilize it. But nonetheless, you can choose from the test family that you want to do. For example, if you are doing experimental design, oftentimes we are looking to compare means between our control group and the study group, and that's the t-test family. Okay, and then here you can pick the test that you want, which is mean difference between two independent group. If the group that the person is studying independent from each other in term, it is not the same subject, measuring them before and after maybe, or if the two groups, the experiment and the control group are not related to each other, then use the mean difference t-test two independent group. and then this a barrier, which is calculating the required sample size. Okay, here in statistical analysis we have the normal distribution. I think this is very difficult to explain in such a short time, but hopefully this will be helpful. In statistical analysis, we have the normal distribution or the bell-shaped distribution. I think all of you are familiar with this. And when we do non-directional hypothesis, we like to test our hypothesis in both tails or both ends of the distribution. So therefore, we will pick two tails, which mean the two tails of the distribution. And then for the effect size here, according to Cohen's Bauer premium, I think most of you familiar with this article. He explained the effect size and give a small and medium large effect size based on previous research. That's why it is very important to be familiar with the research. So if you know that there is effect of this intervention, then you aim for large effect size because you already know that there is impact for this intervention that you are examining. However, if it is a new study and you don't know what is the impact of your intervention on the outcome, then you aim for a small effect size or medium effect size. And how to know once you put your pointer at that effect size area, it will give you, as you can see, small effect size is 0.20, medium effect size is 0.50, and so on. So here we are aiming for maybe 0.5 medium effect size. And then alpha, we usually set our alpha to 0.05, and then our power usually set at, which is the beta, usually set at 0.8. Okay. And allocation ratio is the ratio between the control group and the study group, which is 1:1. So for each participant in the control group, you have one participant in the study group, and then you hit here, calculate, and it will give you the required sample size. And here you have 64 participants in group 1, 64 participants in group 2, with total of 128 participants for the study. And this should be different from the study to study based on the items you have here. Okay, hopefully this answered the question.
Okay, second question, the audience asking about the funding institutes in Saudi Arabia for medical proposals.
Okay, I am aware of King Abdulaziz city.
Yes, yes.
I'm aware of Ministry of Health. Yes. There is funds from a Ministry of Education, which is the Research Priority Fund. I think nowadays we have fund in King Saud University related to COVID-19 studies. I don't know if submission is still open, but there is
numerous. Till the 20th of April, yes.
Yes, yes. And Sigma Theta Tau, if you are a nurse, the person who is asking, there is international fund too as well. I know that the question was about the local fund, but why not aiming for international fund if it is available?
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Arawiya, for your time, because we have to move on to the second speaker, Mr. Naeem Nuruddin. He's the CEO and Managing Director, Sierra Limited UK. Mr. Naeem is a graduate in pharmacology with toxicology from King's College, University London, where he started his career as a clinical pharmacokineticist. During his 20-year career, Mr. Naeem has held various positions of increasing seniority, and is actually the CEO of Sierra Limited UK, which he founded in 2007. His company, highly specialized and focused organization, offering training, development, and consultancy in all aspects of international council for harmonization and good clinical practice and related guidelines, as well as for personal effectiveness and behavioral skills. Mr. Naeem brings with him over 20 years of experience in clinical development, training, consultancy, and education, spanning Europe, United States, Middle East, and Asia. Mr. Naeem is also a lecturer at Cranfield University, UK, and a certified facilitator and behavioral skills trainer. Mr. Naeem has worked extensively in the Middle East and Asia, developing and building clinical research capability with the regions. In Saudi Arabia, Mr. Naeem was intimately involved and chosen to establish the structure of the Ministry of Health Ethics Committees, and was heavily involved in developing the standard operating procedures and deploying the training for the Ethics Committee members nationally. Please welcome Mr. Naeem Nuruddin.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Live?
Yes, yes, we can, yes.
First of all, I'd really like to thank Dr. Tariq very much for providing me with the opportunity to speak here today. It really is an honor and a pleasure for me to be here. So what I'll do now is I'll go straight into my presentation, and let me just quickly bring this on. There you go. Okay, so what I'll do in the next hour and a half or so is give a quick overview of the 2030 Saudi vision, and then I'll really focus on the roles and the responsibilities of the institutional review boards and how they are established within the kingdom. So first of all, these are just some of the few highlights from the 2030 vision and how this is going to tie in with the clinical research capabilities, the research facilities within the kingdom. So first of all, one of the biggest visions was to develop a promising and competitive industry and increase the share of GDP and the job market within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, this spans a number of industries, from the automotive industries to the pharmaceutical industry, as well as medical supplies. And this is where we are going to come in with the pharmaceutical, the research type of industry, and really see how we can build on this and increase our capabilities within the country. Obviously, one of their big vision was to improve the ranking of the kingdom in the Global Competitive Index. And this is a measure of the productivity of the countries within the world. Just for your information, at the moment, #1 is Singapore in the Global Competitive Index. Obviously, strengthening the kingdom's position amongst the economies worldwide is one of the key visions as well. And generating major job opportunities for Saudi citizens. Research provides a huge opportunity, not just for the citizens to actually have for employment purposes, but also for subjects or patients to get access to newer medications, to experimental medications sooner and earlier. And obviously, there's a lot of talent here within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and we need to maximize the talent we have and really deliver on the vision that has been set. So if you look at all of this, if you look at these few highlights of the visions, this ties in very, very nicely with what our research philosophies, what our research initiatives are going to be within the kingdom. And what I am going to do is just going to focus on one aspect in this talk, and this is going to be on the institutional review boards. Who are they? What do they do? And how are they established and organized within the kingdom? So before I do that, I'll just give you a very brief overview of some of the research ethics codes, guidelines, and regulations. So these are the regulations or the guidelines which talk about ethics, which is a fundamental aspect of research. If we go back in time, one of the first kind of definitive documents which talked about ethics and research ethics was the Nuremberg Code, which came out in 1949. And this Nuremberg Code came on after the atrocities which occurred in the World War II, in the prisoner of war camps, where there were a lot of unethical experiments being conducted on the prisoners of war. And this led to the Nuremberg trials after the war. And then the first code came out, the Nuremberg Code, which talked about human research. That yes, we know human research is necessary. However, we must be very ethical in how we do it. And the first point of the Nuremberg Code was autonomy, informed consent. And I'll be saying more about that later on. Then moving forward in time, in 1964 came the Declaration of Helsinki. Now, this Declaration of Helsinki is the cornerstone of research ethics. This is our foundation. Everything we do in research stems from the Declaration of Helsinki. It first came out in 1964, and we are currently in the 2013 version. All of you researchers out there, I would highly recommend you read this document. This document is guiding you or providing you the ethical principles of conducting research in human subjects. Another kind of code or guideline is something called the Belmont Report. And this is something which is applicable more in the United States and very similar to the Declaration of Helsinki, where it talks about the fundamental ethical principles of human research. We also have the CIOM's International Guidelines for Research Involving Human Subjects, again, addressing research ethics, addressing the role of the institutional review boards, addressing how subjects should be cared for within any form of research. But what is very, very important and what came out in 1996 was the International Council of Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, ICH for short, Good Clinical Practice, or GCP. This is the guideline, the internationally accepted guideline that is used anywhere around the world to conduct research in humans. This guideline, or ICH, is composed of a number of guidelines, and they're all classified into I, E, S, or M categories. And ESM categories. And what's very, very important to us are the E categories. And in the E category, we have E6, which is Good Clinical Practice. This guideline came out in 1996, the Good Clinical Practice Guideline. However, it was updated 4 years ago in 2016. So we now have ICH GCP Revision 2, which we must be following. So whether we do a clinical research proposal or study in Saudi Arabia or United Kingdom, the US, or wherever, anywhere in the world, we must follow ICH GCP. Now, these are guidelines, a few regulations. If I look at the country-specific regulations, just to give you a few examples, in the United States, you have Title 21, the Code of Federal Regulations, and there are a number of regulations in there. And one of them is Part 50, which talks about human subjects and protection of human subjects and informed consent. And Part 56 talks about the institutional review boards. In the European Union, we have the European Union Clinical Trial Directive. And closer to home, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we have the National Committee of Bioethics, or the NCBE regulation, which is the implementing regulations of the laws of ethics of research on living creatures. So as you can see, there are a number of regulations, a number of codes over here addressing ethics, and now I'm going to just focus a little bit more on that. So when we talk about ethics, what do we mean ethics? What are the fundamental ethical principles we talk about when there will be an ethical review by an institutional review board? Well, all research involving human subjects has to be conducted to some fundamental ethical principles. And those three listed here are the universally recognized ones: autonomy, beneficence and non-maleficence, and justice. These are fundamental ethical principles, and I'll just expand a little bit more on these. When we talk about autonomy, autonomy actually means acknowledging that the subject has the capacity to make a personal choice. Basically, this is informed consent. Every individual has a right to make a decision to participate in research, and that decision is solely their decision, if they're capable of making this. And I shall say more about that later. So one of the principles is autonomy. The next one is beneficence and non-maleficence. This is looking at the risk-benefit ratio. What is the risk of doing this research, and what is the benefit? What we need to do is maximize the potential benefit and minimize the potential harm. So when you're writing your research proposals, this is something you need to consider: is what is the risk benefit of doing this research? What am I going to do? How is informed consent going to be taken? And then the final principle is justice. This is looking at fairness and equity of subject selection. Basically, what this means is everyone must have a fair, equal opportunity to participate in research. There should be no bias. So these are just some of the fundamental ethical principles. What I'd like to do now is spend a little bit of time talking about the institutional review boards, or sometimes also known as the independent ethics committees. These groups of individuals are critical in any research. They provide us the approval. They are the gateway that will allow research to be conducted in any institution. These individuals are very, very important, and I shall now define what these individuals are. So if you remember, I mentioned a little while ago, the guideline which is internationally acceptable around the world is ICH-GCP. So I'm going to give you now the definition of an institutional review board as per ICH-GCP. In every country in the world, our institutional review boards must meet this definition. So this is what an IRB is. It's an independent body constituted of medical, scientific, and non-scientific members whose responsibility is to ensure the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects involved in a clinical trial by doing a number of things, such as reviewing, approving, providing continuing review of a protocol or a proposal, the amendments, and very, very importantly, also looking at the methods and materials that are used in obtaining or documenting informed consent. Some very important keywords here is an independent body. Independent of whom? Well, independent of the sponsor of the research and independent of the investigator who's conduct the research. So an independent body. And this body must be constituted of both medical, scientific, as well as non-scientific members. So this review board must have someone on there who is not a scientist or from a scientific background. When this institutional review board is actually reviewing a proposal, they are doing one very, very fundamental role. And that is to ensure that the protection of the rights, the safety, and well-being of human subjects who are involved in a clinical trial is being maintained. So that is their role. They are the gateway to actually say, yes, we feel that this is an ethical clinical trial. Why? Because the rights of the subject, safety of the subjects and human subjects involved in a clinical trial is being protected. So that's the definition of an institutional review board. Now, in some countries, the institutional review board is termed as an independent ethics committee. So what I'll do is I'll just show you the definition of an independent ethics committee. And if you look, here is this, again, this is the good clinical practice or the GCP definition. It's an independent body, a review board or a committee, can be institutional, regional, national, or supranational, that's constituted of medical professionals and non-medical professionals. Again, very similar to the definition of an institutional review board, medical professionals, non-medical members, whose responsibility is to ensure the protections of the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects involved in a clinical trial. And this is what an IRB is doing. Again, how will this be done? By reviewing the protocol, approving the protocol or the proposal, looking at the suitability of the researcher or the investigator. That's another term for researcher is investigator. The facilities, the methods, very importantly, that are used in obtaining and documenting informed consent of trial subjects. As you can see over here, IRB, IEC for short, very, very similar. But what is most important is that they must act in agreement with good clinical practice, which is the ICH-GCP E6 guidelines. So we have a group of people here, we have this board, what are they actually doing? Okay, so these are their responsibilities according to ICH-GCP, the international guideline for conducting clinical research. Well, they must safeguard the rights, safety, and well-being of all trial subjects with special attention to vulnerable subjects. Now, vulnerable subjects are those subjects whose capacity to make a decision, a fully informed decision, may be compromised. Example of vulnerable subjects include minors or children's or pediatric clinical trials, or those whose mental capacity may have been compromised, such as Alzheimer's disease patients, even unconscious patients, for example. So very importantly, this is one of the fundamental responsibilities. How are the rights and safety of these subjects being protected? They will review the trial protocol, the protocol or the proposal, and the associated documents. So all the documents that will be provided to the subjects or associated with the clinical trial must be reviewed by the institutional review board. And our guidelines, ICH GCP says within a reasonable time, and I'll come back to that in a short while, and the decision must be documented in writing. So important over here, any decision that is made by the institutional review board must be documented in writing and provided to the researcher. As an IRB, they will consider the qualifications of the investigator of the proposed trial. Is this investigator or researcher actually qualified to conduct the clinical trial? Why this is very important? Well, this will ensure that the safety, rights, and well-being of subjects is being protected. Now, the IRB is also not just involved in giving the initial approval of your research, but they have to review each ongoing research as it's happening. So their role does not end in the beginning that here's a proposal, can I conduct it? Yes, you can, but then they must be doing a continuing review of the ongoing research. And the kind of information they will review, I shall come back to in a very short while. One thing they will really look at is the informed consent and the consenting procedures. How is informed consent going to be taken from the subjects? They wish to know this. And this has to be very clear because this is the fundamental aspect of human rights, which is the autonomy and the rights of the subject. So the consenting procedures, who takes consent? How is consent done? What if this is a minor or a child? How is consent going to be taken from a child? Yes, if we are going to do a pediatric clinical trial, we must have consent from the child as well. And this consent from an individual who is unable to give informed consent, we term this as assent. So assent is required from vulnerable subjects. So mentally incapacitated individuals, minors in clinical trials, we will need to get their assent. In addition, we will need to get consent from a legally acceptable representative of theirs. So if there is research you're doing which involves these types of populations, then you must clearly describe how this is going to be done. The ICH GCP guidelines give you some guidance on how this should be done. What else must they do? Well, they determine any ethical concerns and regulatory requirements that need to be addressed for non-therapeutic trials. There may be trials which are non-therapeutic, such as looking at new models of, for example, pain model. If it's non-therapeutic, what are the concerns? And if there are any regulatory requirements, our institutional boards need to be fully aware of them. Very importantly, again, this is quite important now because things have changed a lot. They will need to determine the ethical and regulatory requirements for situations where consent of the subject is not possible. What if, for example, the subject is under respiratory arrest? Yes, and we may see that with some of our COVID trials now, and we need to put them into a clinical trial. How would we take informed consent from these subjects? A very complicated area, but if we are going to do these types of trials, or for example, trials in stroke patients, how do we take consent from them? All of this needs to be clearly identified in your research proposal, which is something the IRB will review in great detail. Importantly, we will also look at the method and amount of payment that's provided to subjects. Now, subjects who are entering in any research or clinical research, we don't usually pay them. The only time we will pay subjects to be in clinical trials is, for example, if it's a phase 1 type of healthy volunteer trial, where the subjects are not going to get any therapeutic benefit. So what we'll do is we can actually give them a compensation amount. But what's very important is our IRBs need to know exactly the amount of compensation that's being provided. What we also do is we do reimburse subjects for any expenses that they've incurred to participate in the research. For example, if they have to catch a taxi to the institution purely because of the research, we can actually give them the payment for that research. So we can provide them with a compensation for that. Any amount that is being provided to subjects, the ethics committee has to approve before that's given to them. And very importantly, within the consent forming or the consent procedures, it's very important in writing, it's clearly mentioned what compensation is being provided. So these are just some of the very basic responsibilities, or the fundamental responsibilities regarding of the IRB's IECs. Now, I've talked about the responsibilities, and I'll actually say a little bit more about them as we move along. How are the IRBs composed of? So what is the composition of the IRB? How many people should be in there? Well, we know, for example, that there must be a non-medical person, there should be a scientific person. Who else should be in there? And now I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the composition of the Institutional Review Board. First of all, we will have a chairperson or a deputy of the chairperson within the Institutional Review Board. Now, the requirement in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is the following. This individual has to be a Saudi national. They must have experience in biological research. And very importantly, they may be from within or outside the institution. This requirement here is very much in line with the NCBE regulation on ethics on living creatures. So this, we will have a chairperson. The chairperson or the deputy has to be a Saudi national, have experience in biological research, and could be within or from outside of the institution. So a chairperson, but what about the rest of the members of the IRB? Who would the rest of the members of the IRB? Well, at least one member who is in a non-scientific area, you know that. At least one member who is scientific and medically qualified. And at least one member who is familiar with customs and culture of Saudi society. So in Saudi Arabia, all our institutional review boards must be meeting these requirements. And there must be a member who's at least got some basic knowledge in statistics and science. Obviously, every proposal is going to have a statistical component to it, and our ethics committees want to have the assurance that we have someone on our committee who is familiar with this. And very importantly, at least one member who is independent of the institution or the trial site. So how much there should be in total? Well, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there should be at least 7 to 15 members as part of an institutional review board. So we have a chairperson. We have our board as well, our members. Then we have an IRB secretary. And this secretary would be from the institution. And they're going to be responsible for all the administrative aspects of the IRB. So all the admin part of it, scheduling the meetings, getting all the documentation that's required. They're going to be responsible for this. Doing the minutes, for example, coordinating with the chairperson, coordinating with ethics committee members. Very importantly, maintaining records, maintaining minutes of meetings. This will be the role of the IRB secretary. And also, very importantly, they will maintain a current list of their members and their roles and the date of joining. So we have our IRB chairperson, we have our secretary, and we have our committee members over there. So what do they actually do when they're reviewing a proposal which comes through? Yes, they're going to look at the ethics of this. Is this ethical to do? But they go a little bit beyond that as well. What else do they look at? Well, they look at the scientific integrity of the study. And in the previous lecture, which was very nicely put about the scientific aspect, the statistical aspects, the design of the study, all of this is something they will review. Is this scientifically valid study? Does this research ask a right question? And the answer, is it going to be measured properly? So what are the endpoints? What are the objectives? And what are the endpoints of the research? So scientific integrity is very important. What is the power of the study? What is the sample size of the study? So they will review that. So is that enough to get a good study? No, we need to go beyond this and look at further aspects. We look at the scientific value, and then we also look at the social value. What is this adding socially? Is the question that's being asked already been answered? Why are you doing this research? What value will this research add to our country? What will it add to the patients or the subjects? That's another question they will ask. They will look at, for example, the risk-benefit ratios. What are the risks in the study? In any type of research, yes, we know there are going to be risks, especially when we start doing more of these investigational clinical trials. That is one of these big studies where the drugs are not licensed on the market and they have come into our kingdom. Because this is what we want. We want more research coming into our kingdom so we can do this research. So when these studies come in, we need to look at the risk benefit. What is the risk? What is the benefit of this? What is the risk benefit ratio? It's a very important decision the ethics committee has to make. And as an ethics committee, collectively, they have the expertise to actually answer some of these questions. They will also look at the informed consent procedures. And I mentioned that a short while ago. They would want to see how is informed consent being taken? How is this being documented? According to good clinical practice, ICH GCP clearly states the elements that are required in a consent form. So we have guidance if we are going to write a consent form, what to include in the consent form. So our ethics committees will look at this consent form, they will scrutinize this consent form. They will say, is this in compliance with what good clinical practice is? They will look at this from the perspective of, if I was a subject or a patient participating in the clinical trial, does this make sense to me? And this is this big value our layperson on the ethics committee adds. So this individual who has no scientific background can look at this from the subject's perspective. So when I say subject, I also mean patient. It's just a term we use in research. We call them subjects. So they will look at this. They will look at the language of the consent. Is this non-scientific language? Will the subjects understand this? Very, very important. So they will scrutinize this and the procedure, who is doing consent and how is it being done? How are you ensuring that these subjects understood what you told them? They understand research, and by signing the consent form, which is a requirement from good clinical practice, they actually agree and comprehend the research. Our IRBs want to know how that is going to be done. And also they look at the respect for the subjects. How are subjects being respected in here? And when we say respect, how are their rights being respected? What are the safety precautions? If there are any issues the subjects have, if there are any side effects they have, how are these being handled? What is the medical oversight of these subjects? So when the ethics committees are doing this, our institution review boards are doing this, this is when they're looking. When they meet together, these are some of the fundamental questions they want answered. They will look at the research proposal. Hence, it's very important that when you do send a proposal, it's a very comprehensive proposal. The right, correct literature review has been done. Your objectives are correct, and all the ethical aspects have been addressed. So, our institution review board, very importantly, in any country, anywhere in the world, has to function to our national laws and regulations. In our kingdom, we have the NCBE regulations, and we have good clinical practice, ICH GCP. We all have to follow those. There's no leeway in this. Remember earlier on I mentioned that one of the requirements or the responsibilities of the IRB was to actually review the proposal in a reasonable time frame. Well, in the kingdom, we have a time frame, and this is our time frame. Our IRB will review the research within 45 calendar days. And that's a fairly respectable timeline, because there's sometimes when you're looking at the researches, they are quite complicated and we need time to review these. So they will do this. So 45 calendar days is the maximum timeline for any research proposal once it's submitted to our IRB to get a response. And that's for any kind of standard research proposal. But if it's a gene therapy kind of proposal, then we're going to extend this to 60 days because we need some expert review coming in and it can take longer. So very importantly, as potential researchers out there, we need to know, okay, our timeline in the kingdom is upon submission. And when we're submitting, we're going to submit all the documents our IRB wants, the proposal, the consent form. If it's an investigational study, there's a document called the investigator's brochure needs to be submitted. Any patient awareness material, any patient recruitment material, all of this must be submitted to the IRBs for their approval, for their review and approval before any research can commence. So once our IRBs have received all the documents, they will meet, they will convene, and when they convene, they will convene as a quorum. And I shall come back to that in a very short while. Once they've convened and they've given the decision, then the research can commence. Now, very importantly, this is where their role does not end. They still want to have, they have to have a continuing review of the research. And what we say, good clinical practice actually states, is that it should be, this continued review should be based on intervals, based on the degree of the risks to the human subjects within the clinical trial. So within the research, depending on the risk, the IRBs will mandate, look, you need to provide us with information every month, for example, or 3 months. But the minimum requirement is at least 1 year. So as we're doing our research, we need to be aware that we need to be communicating regularly with our IRBs, keeping them informed of how the research is progressing, because their role is to protect the rights, the safety and well-being of subjects, and how they can achieve that is by being informed of the progress of the research. Now, the IRB may personally, and they're totally entitled to do this, is actually go and review the research at the site. So where the research is being conducted, they can come and review the documents. They want to see, are you following your research proposal? Are you following good clinical practice? And are you following the informed consent procedures? So our IRBs, again, are very, very vigilant. They will go out and they will, if they feel necessary, personally review the procedures at the site. Okay. Now, we talked about a quorum. Earlier on, I mentioned there should be at least 7 to 15 people within an institutional review board. However, we know that in real life, we may not be able to get everybody together, which is understandable. Therefore, we have to stipulate, we have to define that what is the minimum number of individuals required that could make a good review of a research. And this minimum number we call a quorum. So at least a quorum is required to be present to do a full review of a research proposal. And this quorum will have to be at least 7 people, because that is the minimum number that's required. So I'll come back to quorum very shortly in a little while. Now, the meetings in the kingdom will be conducted at least once a month. So every month, the IRBs at the institutions will be convening to discuss any research proposals that have been sent to them. In case, for example, as you know, we are in an emergency at the moment, there are lots of COVID protocols or proposals that have to go through, they can convene more frequently if required. But as a minimum, IRBs will meet once a month every year. Now, the quorum here is going to be, within the kingdom, we've said 2/3 of the total membership will constitute a quorum for a meeting. So 2/3 of 15, if they're present, then we have a quorum. So if we have an IRB meeting, we're getting together and we have less people than a quorum, then we cannot commence with that meeting. So in case the required members are not present, the meeting is considered not valid. So this is very important. So we stipulate 2/3 is about 70% of the total number. For that number to meet, that is what a quorum is going to be. Because we feel within that, we have the expertise to actually fully review a research proposal that comes both from the scientific, social, and ethical aspect. Now, all members who are part of the quorum must have the following qualifications. There must be at least a medical scientist there or some of the basic scientists. We need to have someone who's independent of the institution, and we need a non-scientific layperson. So as a minimum, in this quorum, we must have at least one of these people or individuals with this quality mentioned over here. Once we have this, we then have a quorum, then we can review the research. If either one of these individuals is not present, then we do not have a quorum that's stipulated as per the SOPs within the kingdom. Now, another role that is actually available is this research institutional official, a very, very important role here. Not a chairperson or a member of any designated IRB. This individual has an important role in what we say setting the tone. For example, by promoting an institutional culture of respect and conscience, so that the ethical conduct of human subjects research is supported at the highest level of the organization. So we have the RIO. So what this individual is involved in doing, they're not a member of the IRB, but they ensure that regulations, guidelines are being complied with. They make sure the IRB functions independently and that its chairs and its members are as per good clinical practice. They ensure that adequate training, resources, etc., all of these are in place for the IRBs. And if required, they may review agreements such as investigator agreements within the institution if that would help. So we have a very important overarching research institutional official who is going to provide this review of making sure that our IRBs are acting to the highest standards that are expected from international requirements. And this individual will also liaise with the regional chief, research chief, and even the CEO of the institution if that's required. Now, our institutional review boards, very, very important. Good clinical practice stipulates that every institutional review board must perform its functions with written SOPs. SOPs stands for Standard Operating Procedures. So every institutional board will have in detail how they conduct their activities. How do we train our IRB members? How do we recruit our IRB members? What is our meeting schedule, etc. So all of these SOPs are in place. They have to comply with GCP and regulatory requirements. Yes, we know that that's no leeway in that. And they will maintain all written records and activities and meeting minutes. So everything, every research proposal that has been reviewed, the meetings of the minutes have to be kept. And also very importantly, the decision of the ethics of the institution review board must be documented as well. What we do allow is, for example, when the IRB is doing a review, the researcher or the investigator is allowed to come and present the research or provide clarifications on the research. But very importantly, they cannot be part of the voting process. So just to clarify here a little bit more, we can have situations where an investigator is a member of the IRB. Is that allowed? Yes, we can do that. However, that investigator cannot be part of the deliberations or the decisions or the voting of that particular study. So if as a researcher, I am a part of the IRB, I will have to step down when my proposal is being reviewed. So having said that, so our IRB is very, very important. You have a very, very strong role. It's a group of individuals with a relevant expertise to review the protocol, to review a research proposal. Now, what can happen is in certain situations, as an IRB, we get a research proposal, but on our board, we don't have the expertise. So let's say, for example, a pediatric clinical trial research comes to us, but none of us are pediatricians, or none of us have had experience in pediatrics. So as an institutional review board, what is allowed is we can actually get an expert to come in and sit at the meeting. The expert, so when we as an IRB are going to discuss the research, this individual can come in and provide us some guidance, some information. However, this person is not allowed to vote, and they're not a member of the ethics committee. They're just an expert who is allowed to come in and give us guidance. So that is something as an institution review board, we are very, very allowed, we are very welcome to do, to ensure that when we make our decision, we have had all the right input into reviewing the proposal. So what I shall do now is briefly go over the IRB infrastructure within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And this is a little overview of how this works. Within the kingdom, the 3 types of IRBs have been established. And these are the names that have been provided. one is called the Central Ethics Committee, or the CEC, and another has been called the Collaborative, but also can be known as the Regional Ethics Committee. So you have the Central Ethics Committee, the Regional or Collaborative Ethics Committee, and the local or local institutional ethics committees. So these three kinds of ethics committees are present within the kingdom, and they all play a different role. And I'm going to explain to you what type of role these institutional review boards will be playing. So the Central Ethics Committee, or the CEC, this is located at the General Administration of Research Studies. And they are instrumental, and their role is in providing approval for any national health programs or any MOH-funded researches according to the MOH research priorities that would be initiated within the MOH hospitals all over the kingdom. So national health programs, MOH-funded research, if it's going to be all over the MOH hospitals over the kingdom, that research would be reviewed by the Central Ethics Committee. Okay, and also they will provide the ethics review for studies that are submitted to the MOH directorates within Riyadh itself. So when we have these national health programs, the Central Ethics Committee is responsible to ensuring that when they're approving these types of researches, whether it's the national health program or the MOH funded research, they have the necessary input from the regional ethics committees as well as the local institutional boards. So that's very important. There's a nice big communication link over here. So the Central Ethics Committee, so any MOH funded or national health program coming in, they will seek some input from the regional ethics committees or the collaborative ethics committees and the institutional ones. What the Central Ethics Committee can do is they may invite members of the regional or collaborative ethics committees to participate or observe in the discussions of these national programs. There's a lot of transparency here, a lot of support here. So when these national programs are coming in, these will go to the CEC, and the CEC may invite the regional ethics committees or the institutional ethics committees to actually come and observe the review process. Now, the collaborative ethics committees, again, the term they've used is collaborative ethics committees. You can consider them as regional ethics committees. A number have been established, and they've been divided up regionally. You've got the central region, the western region, and the eastern region. So within the central region, these kind of regional ethics committees will cover the MOH ethics committees in central, northern, and southern regions. The Regional Ethics Committee in the Western region will cover the MOH ethics committees in the Western region. And similarly, in the Eastern region, the collaborative or the Regional Ethics Committee will cover the MOH ethics committees within the Eastern region. So we can look at kind of a regional split of this. So we've got the Central Ethics Committees, we've got the regional or the collaborative ethics committees, but what about these local institutional ethics committees? Okay. Now, what happens is within each institution, there will be an ethics committee, and each ethics committee is then aligned into a regional ethics committee. Okay. So there have been a number of reasons why this has been done, but this mainly is to look at efficiencies coming in. So we have within the region a collaborative ethics committee, and then within that region, you will have the local ethics committees, which are aligned to this collaborative ethics committee. So then the question is, what do the collaborative ethics or the regional ethics committees do versus the institutional ethics committees? Okay. And here's the answer to that question. So as I mentioned earlier, the Central Ethics Committee, they are solely involved in reviewing any national health programs that are initiated within the MOH hospitals across the kingdom, or any MOH funded researches according to the MOH priorities. And they will do the review of studies within the MOH directorates in Riyadh only. So this is what the Central Ethics Committees are doing. Now, what about these regional or collaborative ethics committees? Now, these ethics committees or institutional review boards will perform the review and approval of the more complex, complicated and high-risk studies, such as the phase 2-3 type of studies. So just to explain what I mean by phase 2-3 types of studies is when we're looking at a new product coming, a new investigational product comes in from animal research, we need to test this in humans. And when we test it in humans, we say we're taking it into the clinical aspect of research. And within the clinical aspect of research, the clinical trials are divided into 4 phases. You have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 type of trials. So the phase 1 type of trials, these are the very complicated first in human type of trials. So these are the type of trials where we first go into our human subjects, and these trials are very complicated. They're very high risk because we have no idea how the subjects are going to react, and they're usually done at specialized institutions or at hospitals with the facilities. And the purpose of these kind of phase 1 type of trials, again, all of these need ethical approval, is when we're doing a phase 1 trials, and these are done in very small number of subjects only, we're looking at the safety of the product. Is this new investigational product safe? Is it safe? Is it tolerable? So we're looking at the safety and the tolerability. And also we do a number of things in phase 1 clinical research where we look at food interaction studies. We look at very importantly, the pharmacokinetics of the product, of the drug. What happens to the drug once it's taken? Where does it go? What is the half-life? How is it excreted? So phase 1 trials are small, very high risk studies done at specialized institutions. And the objective is mainly to look at the safety, tolerability of the investigational product, and if possible, any evidence of efficacy of the product. So once, for example, the product goes through phase 1 of clinical research, we then need to take it to the level, and let's say in phase 1 trials, the product is looking safe, it's looking good, we have some indication it works, we then go into the phase 2 aspects of research, and phase 2 is usually the first time in patients. So this is where we're going to test this product in subjects with the disease. Again, very exciting studies, because this will actually tell us, give us an idea, does this drug actually work? So our phase 2 type of studies are the bigger studies, fairly high risk type of studies, and we're in the patient population, and we're trying to look at a number of things. And one of the important aspects we look at is A, does it actually work? And secondly, is it safe? But very importantly, what is the right dose of the product? So we do dose ranging studies in phase 2 type of studies. We do proof of concept studies. Does this drug actually work? So phase 1, looking at safety, tolerability, some form of evidence of efficacy. In phase 2, we're trying to see, does this actually work? And if, for example, the drug seems to be working well, then we need to prove it. Because at the moment, phase 2 trials are usually very small, and statistically, we need bigger patient population. And this is when we go into our phase 3 clinical trials. And these are the very large multinational, multi-center types of clinical research studies with thousands of patients done all over the world, where we compare the investigational product with usually the gold standard. So these are phase 3 type of trials. So these types of trials, phase 2, phase 3, are done on unlicensed products. So these products do not have a license in the world anywhere yet. And these are type of very complicated, complex studies, which our collaborative or regional ethics committees are going to be reviewing. Now, for phase 4 types of trials can be many types of trials. Usually when we say phase 4 is once we finish our phase 3 type of research, we then have our answer usually that, yes, this drug works. And what we do is we submit to our regulators to get approval for the drug. So we want the license for the drug. And this is usually done by phase 3 trials or 1 or 2 phase 3 trials where we'll submit and we will get approval for the drug. And once the drug is approved, drug is on the market, usually any trial conducted after that, we call it a phase 4 trial. So phase 4 trials are usually on marketed products, and we can have interventional ones. And phase 4 trials also include the non-interventional trials, and these are the observational types of trials. So these are when you're observing patients, observing subjects. They've been provided drugs in the normal way as you would in clinical practice. We call them phase 4 trials. And some examples were provided to you in the previous lecture. So collaborative or the regional institutional review boards are going to review these complex phase 2-3 types of trials. So what do the local institutional ethics committees or institutional review boards review? Well, they will provide review of the minimal risk research. So such as the academic surveys, such as the non-interventional studies or the low risk studies. So all the very low risk studies, academic surveys, non-interventional studies, then your submission for approval for this would go to a local institutional ethics committee, and it would need not to go to the CEC or the regional or collaborative ethics committee. So this just is a very quick summary of who does what. So Central Ethics Committee, National Health Programs, MOH funded research, and MOH research in the MOH directorates in Riyadh. Collaborative or regional ethics committees, the complex phase 2, phase 3 type of clinical research, and the institutional review boards, institutional ethics committees, the low minimal risk studies. So this is how that happens. So how does the procedure work? So let's say we have been approached in the kingdom to conduct a phase 2 or a phase 3 trial for a new product to look at COVID, for example, yes? How can we get that study initiated within the kingdom? Well, there are two things we need. Obviously, we will need our Saudi FDA to provide approval to conduct that research. But very, very importantly, we must have our institutional review board approval to conduct this type of research. So this is how the process actually works. The sponsor, which could be yourself if you are sponsoring the research is coming from you, or could be a big pharmaceutical company or biotechnology company, they would need to make a submission to the collaborative or the regional ethics committee. Because it's a phase 2-3 type of trial, the submission will go to them. In the kingdom, the submission is planned to be electronically done. So it'll be an electronic submission. So once the regional or the collaborative IRB has got this proposal, within 30 days, they will review this. And if this research is going to be done regionally within the local institutional ethics committees, there will be a communication between the regional ethics committee, the regional institutional review board, and the local ethics committee, and they will get the opportunity to provide their comments. So the region institute, the collaborative or the regional IRB will get the proposal. Within 30 days, they will send this to every institution IRB, which is going to be part of the research. This institutional IRB will have 15 days to do an expedited review and provide their feedback to the collaborative or the regional ethics review board, who then will give their decision in writing to the sponsor of the research. All of this will happen within 45 days. If this is a minimal risk study, for example, and you want to conduct it at your institution, you will just submit it at your institution. It will not go to this institution here or the CEC. So that is, in a nutshell, the kind of procedure, and it's a very efficient procedure. We've got collaborative, we've got the local or the regional, the local institutional ethics committees, and on top of that, we have the Central Ethics Committee. So what happens during the review? Again, the review meeting at least is going to be once a month. More frequent, as I mentioned earlier, if it's required. The quorum that I stipulated must be present. The minimum number must be present. All documents for review must be submitted to the institutional review board at least 2 weeks in advance of their meeting. So as a researcher, you must know that when they are going to be meeting, and you have 2 weeks time to at least give them the notice that here's my proposal 2 weeks in advance of the meeting. If required, as I mentioned earlier, an expert may be invited by the ethics committee, by the institution review board, and all IRB members will sign an attendance log. All IRB members are going to disclose any conflict of interest, and this will be documented in the minutes of every meeting. We are being very, very transparent. There's no bias in the review. We will document. So if a member of the IRBs, let's say, for example, it's their wife's research which is being reviewed, they have a conflict of interest. So they will have to withdraw from sitting at that specific meeting. As a researcher, we call them investigators or principal investigators. They may be invited to attend the meeting and answer any questions which the IRB may have for them. But the deliberations on that specific research will only begin once the researcher or the principal investigator has actually left the meeting. Now, so that is like the process. So we have before 2 weeks, within at least 2 weeks before the IRB is going to be meeting, you make your submission. The IRB is very much in compliance with local regulations, with GCP, and with the methods I mentioned over here. They will sit, they will meet, and then they will provide you with their opinion. They either can approve, they can disapprove, or give conditional approval, depending on their decision. Very importantly, we have this timeline of 45 days. Any questions that are asked of the IRB, respond to them quickly. Otherwise, you're going to delay the timeline of getting your approval for your research. For ongoing review, now, as I mentioned earlier on, the IRB's role does not end at just approving the research. They are going to review the research. They want to review the research as it is progressing. And while they'll do that, they want to ensure that there's no risk being posed to the subjects. They want to ensure that the rights, the safety, the well-being of the subjects is being protected, because that is their fundamental role. How they will do that is here. If, for example, there are any amendments to the protocol, if you've changed your protocol, you've changed your proposal, and you're doing something differently, it must be approved before you can implement this. So you must let the IRB know. If there are any study documents, such as the ICF is the informed consent form, if that has changed in any way, it must be approved by the IRB. If there's new information about the product, IB stands for Investigator's Brochure. An Investigator's Brochure is a compilation of all the information about the study drug if that drug is not yet on the market. So what usually happens within the pharmaceutical company has got, or a biotech company has got a new product, they will have a document which contains all the information about the product, the animal data, the physiochemical, anything, and that document is called an investigator's brochure. If, for example, the drug is on the market, all of that information is available on something called the SMPC. My mind's gone blank on what that actually stands for at the moment. I'll get back to you on that. So it's called on that. So they will look at that data. They will also look at any reports. So they will mandate what type of reports they want to see. At least there's going to be an annual report, but there will also be an interim report. If there are any changes to the study team or the investigator, the IRB needs to be informed of that. Very importantly, the IRB also would want to know if there are any deviations to the research. Were you following the research? If you weren't, why not? This is information the IRB needs to know, because it is their own. Something which is very, very important is the safety reporting aspect. Our IRBs need to know on a regular basis the safety of the subjects in the clinical trials. And what they want to know are the serious adverse events. And this is something we call an SAE. So a serious adverse event is any event. An adverse event, for example, is an untoward medical occurrence to an investigational product, so like a side effect. But a serious adverse event is any event in which the subject dies, so it's fatal, it's life-threatening, it requires hospitalization or prolongs hospitalization, is a congenital anomaly, birth defect, or is disabling or incapacitating. If it's any of these events that have occurred within the research, your IRB needs to know of this within a timeline they will stipulate. So that's the safety information they require. Then they will also need to know what there's certain events which we call SUSARs. And SUSAR stands for serious, unexpected, suspected, adverse reaction. So serious, unexpected, suspect, adverse reaction is called a SUSAR. And basically what this is any serious adverse event which the investigator or the researcher felt is related to the studied drug in or investigational product. And very importantly, it has never been documented before. And we call these SUSARs, and there are worldwide regulations on these SUSARs, and I won't go into that much detail yet. And also they would want to know of adverse events. So safety reports are going to be sent as part of an ongoing review. On top of that, there are going to be periodic reports that are going to be submitted, which summarize the status of the study at your site, the status of the research, how many subjects, for example, have been enrolled into the study, what was the safety profile, what were the issues, and any other complaints. So the IRBs have a very strong review overview when the study is actually being conducted on how the research is actually progressing. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that the decision of the IRB has to be documented in writing. So what the IRB will actually do once they have completed the review, when they've met as a quorum, they've completed the review, they will actually give you their decision. And that decision will be in writing. And that decision will be very, very clear. It'll tell us who the investigator is, the title, the title of the research project, all the documents that you sent to them that were reviewed with a version number. So very transparent, we're reviewing the right things, the date on which the proposal was discussed, and then their opinion. We either approve it, we disapprove it, or there are certain conditions we want met before you get our approval. They will do that. And on that letter, you will also clearly see what your responsibilities are for this ongoing reporting. So how frequently do the IRB want to see the adverse events, the SAEs, the SUSARs, how they want to handle protocol deviation, the frequency of periodic reporting, and any new information. They will clearly put this on the letter. And finally, they will have a statement on the letter that says, we are in compliance with ICH GCP and local regulatory requirements. And this letter will be signed by the chairperson and provided to the researcher. So the process is very, very straightforward. Yeah? We have a date for our meeting. 2 weeks before that, all the relevant documentation for the proposal must be submitted to them. Should be very clear. Think of all the research, what questions the IRB may have. You should have already addressed them with the document you're submitting to them. It's submitted to them. The IRB will meet. They have a quorum. They will discuss this. If needed, they may get an external expert to provide input into this. They will make their decision. They will provide you their approval, written approval or the written decision, all within 45 days. So we have our IRBs here. So IRBs are being very vigilant. It's a huge role they're playing. They are the voice of the subjects in the clinical trial. They are protecting their rights, their safety, their well-being. How they're doing that? Initial review of the research, the ongoing review of the research. You're sending information to them, they're mandating what they need. What else they can do is a compliance visit. So this is when they can actually come and say, I want to see how this research is being conducted. So what they will do is they'll ensure compliance to the protocol. They'll show compliance to good clinical practice. So what does the researcher compliance to good clinical practice mean? Well, if we go back, I said we have the guidelines, ICH GCP E6 guidelines. In these guidelines, it tells you as a researcher, these are your obligations. In these guidelines, it tells the IRB, this is your obligation. And what the obligation of the IRB is, I've mentioned in this little presentation I've done. So you need to read what GCP is saying as an investigator, what I'm supposed to be doing. They will make sure that you are taking appropriate action to make sure the safety rights of the subjects is being safeguarded at all times. If the subjects are having any kind of they're not well, how are you addressing this? How is the confidentiality being maintained? And this was something the previous lecture talked about, the confidentiality aspects of this. Okay? Very, very importantly, by doing this visit, doing this ongoing review, our IRBs are providing assurance to the public as well as to members of all other IRBs or ethics committees that they have a continual oversight of research of the studies, and ultimately they are ensuring that the safety, the rights of the human subjects are being protected. So having said that, one of the key things which I mentioned earlier on as one of the requirements is SOPs. SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedure. It is a requirement by good clinical practice that every ethics committee has SOPs. And as Dr. Tariq mentioned, I was involved in writing some of these SOPs. We have some SOPs, and here are the SOPs for the ethics committees. Very comprehensive SOPs, which I could tell you, for example, we've got 9 SOPs, how to establish the ethics committee, the composition, roles, responsibilities. What is the submission and review process? What is the ongoing process of an approved study? How to obtain informed consent from prospective subjects, a very important SOP. Managing and hosting a regulatory inspection and sponsor audits. This is very important. As researchers, you can be inspected, but as IRBs, we can also be inspected by external organizations, such as the US FDA, for example. There's also an SOP in the coordination and communication within the kingdom of SOP. So there's a communication pathway between the Central Ethics Committee, the Regional or Collaborative Ethics Committee, and the Institutional Ethics Committee. They're all communicating. There's an SOP on safety reporting. This is talking about adverse events, serious adverse events, and SUSAs, and how these must be reported to the Ethics Committee. I talked about a compliance overview visit. This an SOP on how, if the Institutional Review Board says we're going to come and observe you conducting research, what they will actually do. And finally, there's an SOP on how to write an SOP, I guess. So as you can see, a very, very strong infrastructure we've got in place here to make sure our IRBs are meeting international requirements, which now they are meeting requirements. Now, to help with all this process, we've also produced some associated forms and templates, and there's an application form for a clinical trial, general research. There are templates for reporting reports to IRBs. There's informed consent form, assent form templates, safety reporting templates, lots of templates to help. So making sure that all of us who are involved in the research are actually making sure, bottom line, ultimately, that the rights, safety of subjects is being protected in clinical trials. And very importantly, all the research we conduct is ethical. Now, IRBs play a critical role. Without our IRB approval, we cannot do research. That is one of the fundamental principles of good clinical practice is you must have IRB approval. IRBs are here to help researchers. They're a resource, they're a talent, they provide guidance to you. Work with them closely. Together, we will be able to deliver very, very good clinical research, very good research in general, hopefully increase the amount of research that comes within the kingdom. Ultimately, that will meet the 2030 vision and really put Saudi Arabia and research on human research, clinical research on the map. Because at the moment, if we look at around the world, we have a shortage of researchers. We need more researchers like yourselves. We need IRBs who are very, very compliant, very well established, like the ones now we have here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So on that note, I am happy to take any questions if there are any questions indeed.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Naim. First of all, let me thank you so much for this exciting presentation. I consider you my mentor and I owe you a lot. I hope all the audience captured all this information really. Okay, so we have 3 questions really. One of them, apparently he came a little bit late at the beginning of so he is asking the relation between the GCP and the Institutional Review Board.
Sure. So, okay, yeah. So GCP, good clinical practice, is a guideline. So what this guideline is actually doing, it defines roles of individuals. So in this guideline, we have 3 people roles that are identified. So the GCP guidelines E6. So these are the ones you need to look at, the ICH GCP E6 R2. R2 is a revision because it's the second version. These guidelines, there are 8 sections in these guidelines. Section number 3 of these guidelines talks about the roles and responsibilities of the IRBs. So everything in there has to be met by every IRB in the world. And it gives you the minimum requirements. So that's what it is, it's minimum. So that's what section 3, so that's the relationship of IRB and GCP. GCP is a guideline which is telling you, look, an IRB, if you're going to establish yourself, this is what we expect you to do. This is how you should be composed as a minimum, and this is how you should be functioning. So that's the section 3. The section 4 of the guidelines of GCP tell you the investigator responsibilities. So as I think we have lots of researchers on the call, I would tell you to have a look at section 4 because that is your responsibility. So as a researcher, what should I be doing to ensure that I deliver good clinical research? So I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. The second question is, what is the minimum number of the IRB members to be present to make a decision, and whom should be present essentially?
Okay, so what the minimum number is what's going to be stipulated in the SOPs of the IRB. So what we have put down in the SOPs of the IRB is there should be a minimum of 7 to 15, yeah? But the quorum will be 2/3 of this. So 2/3 of 15, my mathematics isn't actually very good. 10. Yeah, so 2/3 is 10. Now, an interesting point over here is, according to GCP, the IRB minimum composition is 5. Yeah, we have gone for 10, not a problem, as long as we're not below the minimum number. So that's it. So as a minimum, there should be 2/3. So for example, there should be 2/3 of whatever the maximum is. But let's say your maximum was 9 people I have, yes? But your 2/3 of 9 is, well, not very 6. Much. My mathematics is not 6. But the 6 is below the 7 in the SOP. Yeah? Yes. The SOP is 7. So as a minimum, there should be 7. More, perfect. Perfect. Okay. But what must be required is that at least the independent person is there, the lay person is there, and also basically the scientist and the statistician and medical is there. So I hope that one answers that.
Yes, that's great. Yes, that's great. Okay, the last one. One person is asking how many phase 2 and 3 undergoing actually in the kingdom. Clinical trials, yeah.
A very good question. The answer to which I don't actually have, but I can tell you can get this. So we do have a number of phase 2, 3 studies ongoing, but we do not have a significant number. Now, if you want to find exactly how much currently we have of phase 2, 3 trials in the kingdom, you need to go to the website called clinicaltrials.gov. So www.clinicaltrials.gov. It's a website which, according to the Declaration of Helsinki, remember I mentioned it's a minimum, a foundation, it says that every researcher, pharmaceutical company or whoever must disclose the research they're doing. And what big pharmaceutical companies do, they put all of their phase 2, 3 trials on www.clinicaltrials.gov. So whoever asked that question, I'm sorry I don't have the specific number, but if you go to that website, you'll be able to pull that number out because it keeps on changing as well.
Okay, there's one question. Okay. Yeah. Okay. There's one question that came through now. Yes. One audience is asking if my research proposal will work in human cell in vitro, what is the ethical procedure should be done?
Okay, so if we're looking at more of the preclinical kind of aspect, that doesn't really fall under the GCP guidelines because GCP is focusing totally on human research.
Yes.
If you go Yeah, that's on human research. So what you need to do here is look at what your institutional and local regulations are saying about that, then you would follow that. Now, we do have a lot of guidelines on the guidelines released by CIOMS on in vitro type of research there. So I would actually say maybe you need to refer to those guidelines.
Yeah, okay. I think now we arrive to the end. We don't have any more questions. I think everybody is happy. At the end, I wish to thank the speakers and all the audience for participating. And I wish we meet again in another such event. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.